From great heights in Karlov, Atraxa ran the show, but Domain got pushed off so other decks could grow.
It only counts if it mounts. Comment below as we walk through the Week 6 recap of Outlaw Standard.
So quick bet update. Azorius Control has taken a commanding lead with 13 trophies to Domain 6. We've still got time left, so here's hoping that the Regional Championship in Dallas grants Atraxa at least another trophy.
Alrighty, gang. We had 14 tournaments to pull data from thanks to the earlier regional championships overseas. Now, Boros Convoke led the way in Tier 1 land with 3 trophies and 18 top 8s, followed by Esper Midrange with 3 trophies and 14 top 8s. Next up was Azorius Control with 2 trophies and 14 top 8s, and then 4-color Slogurk got 2 trophies and 11 top 8s. Last but not least, Golgari Midrange finally made the leap to Tier 1 with 11 top 8s and a single trophy.
Hey, Temur Ramp kicks off Tier 2 with 10 top 8s, but not a single trophy to be found. Still, consistency counts even if you don't finish. Mono Red followed that up with a single trophy and 5 top 8s, followed by Bant Toxic with 6 top 8s but no trophy. Last but not least, Dimir Aggro back with 4 top 8s and trophy to its name as well.
And over in Brewer's Corner, I'm going to show you a potential contender with the Rebellion remix on Gruul Terror combo, along with Jeskai Legends, Naya Legends, and Selesnya Ramp.
Rebels! As you know, we've partnered with TOA on our State of the Meta series. For those of you who aren't already using TOAMagic for your paper tournament needs, click the link below in our description and go check out their website after the video. And while you're there, don't forget to use code REBELLION for 5% off at checkout.
As always, TOAMagic can deliver all your cards in one package with free track shipping on every order and over 1 million fulfilled orders to date. We're all about dependability here, and we can confirm yet again, TOA gets it done right.
Oh yeah, now on to our Tier 1 archetype breakdowns, starting with Boros Convoke.
Alrighty folks, Boros Convoke went on an absolute tear this past weekend, racking up 18 top 8s and 3 trophies across those 14 events we talked about. Now, shown here is Takanori Watanabe's trophy winning list from the 198-player Rakuten Books Rebound event in Japan. Now, this is about as balanced a list as you're going to see. We've returned to that 2-2 split on Sanguine Evangelist and War Leader's Call. We see a 3-2 split on Invasion of Gobakon and Urabrask's Forge sitting in that sideboard. We have the 2-2-2 split on Get Lost, Destroy Evil, and Lithomantic Barrage in the sideboard, and of course that 1-1 split on Seismic Wave and End the Festivities. And you may be looking at these and going, like, why are we defining the splits this way? Because these are spells that have similar effects or are brought in for similar matchups. For instance, against Control, you're going to bring in those Invasions and those Urabrask's Forges. They're going to functionally do different things, but at the end of the day, they're both control killers, and that's the point behind it. Same goes for these removal spells like Seismic Wave and End the Festivities. They're both coming in the mirror. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this deck seems to have really solidified around a certain set of cards, with just slight adjustments for the meta here and there, week to week. Are there any new innovations coming to this list, do you think, before the end of Thunder Junction?
I mean, we saw some innovation at the beginning with Nurturing Pixie. We've seen different replacements for Yodian Frontliner over the time. We've even seen Thalia come in from time to time. If I expect to see any innovation in this list, it's going to be probably the return of Thalia if we see Control just become such a dominant force that we have to go back to the rule that Pioneer was using for a while there, where they didn't worry about playing removal in the main with like cases. They were just, we have to play Thalia. We have to stutter step Control. So there isn't a lot of innovation to be had in this archetype because so much of it depends upon the individual slots all culminating in one overarching linear game plan. But those slots are somewhat able to be moved. It just has to make sure that you're not shifting it too far and then you end up with a scenario where you don't have enough power to get through with Knight Errant of Eos early on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually what I thought you would say. And Thalia is always on the outside looking in, ready to jump in whenever the coach calls for this deck. And I think that time might be coming soon. But let's head on over and talk about Esper Midrange.
Alrighty, so apologies if I butcher these names, guys. Kente Harane piloted Esper Midrange through a 250-player field in Japan this past weekend, taking out Azorius Control in the finals with their take on this tried and true archetype. So let's kind of talk about what shifted here. We have that 1-1 split of cut down and shoot the sheriff. We have one Tidebinder main, 0 in the side. We've got one Kaido main, 0 in the side. We've got the 1-1 Emperor Urtai split without Shelly. We've got 0 Gix's command in this list. 3 pest controls are sitting in the sideboard, though. And I want to really look at the sideboard and look at these assimilation Aegises sitting down here. To me, this is the hot new tech that's coming out of this tournament, right? This is spicy. The ability to have that early removal that they're not going to cite an artifact hate for Esper Midrange. You've got no other artifacts, right? So if they don't already incidentally have it in, this is going to be strong removal that occasionally allows you to take out like an Aclazotz or a Shelly and then copy it and make your, Deep Cavern Bat or Wedding Announcement token into it. I think that's amazing for like that mid-range mirror that we're looking at.
That really leads me to my question. I saw Kaido, obviously Assimilation Aegis. Do these cards really signify like a shift towards an acknowledgement that the mid-range value mirror is where it's at and trying to win that matchup?
Well, Kaido to me is a signal that you are going to play against control. More than even a mid-range list, and it's not bad against mid-range, but it's not amazing if you're on the draw and they have the ability to establish a board presence before you can protect the Kaido. It's not great, but against control, it's fantastic. They have such a hard time dealing with this. They basically have to land an early Tidebinder or an Emperor to counter-strike and keep it from just going off and drawing you 4 or even 5 cards. So to me, it's a signpost that everybody knew Azorius Control was going to be around, and they were ready to hate it as hard as they could.
Oh yeah, definitely. Gotta hate out Azorius Control. But speaking of that deck, let's talk about Azorius Control.
So, again, sorry on the name, Wai Chung-shi smashed the 79-player MIT Championship in Taiwan with Azorius Control, pushing me ahead in the bet with Max 13-6, hello, and solidifying yet another week in Tier 1 land for the archetype. Now, looking at how this deck is built, there's some things that I'm just going to comment on because I've played a ton of this list. I'm currently on a 17-1 streak with it in Mythic. It's been going well, to say the least. So the differences that I see in these lists lately, how many marches you're going to play, how many get lost you're going to play, whether you play the Depopulate, and whether you play the Jace. Basically, the rest of this is set in stone. A little bit of the mana base may go back and forth on whether you think you can afford to play the 28th land or only 27, and whether you think you can afford to play Murex and Sunken Citadel or not at all. Now, personally, I've gone a slightly different route with my build, but most of this list is what everybody else is playing. So if you look at this, the key hedges that you're looking for are whether or not they're going to be pushing towards those Depopulates and whether or not they're going to be skimping on March effects.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that breakdown. Yeah, I can see where the control decks vary just a little bit according to those standards, but I see no Rest in Peace. I do see 1 Farewell. I do see 2 Kutzil's Flankers in the sideboard. Is this saying that the Temur matchup is less of a concern for control here?
I don't know that it's less of a concern. It's about 10% of the meta right now based on current statistics, right? So it is a strong part of the meta. You need to be winning it. And I personally have to Rest in Peace in my sideboard because I like taking that deck down and I don't like having issues with it. And for those of you who are like, I don't know if Temur can hold up, like actually keep pace, you should wait and see some of the new lists coming out because you're going to notice there's a lot of Thrun. And it's a problem. It's a problem. So yeah, I think it's going to be primed for a hell of a weekend in Dallas if people aren't adjusting and understanding you have to dedicate more slots to it. And in most of the other tournaments, I saw them dedicate those slots. But in this particular instance, not so much. They're willing to skimp. They were willing to hedge slightly towards mid-range as opposed to hedging towards Temur Analyst. And perhaps that's reflective of the metagame they expected to see with Esper Midrange and other decks like that.
Okay. Wow, I can't wait to see what happens this matchup in Dallas. But let's talk about another deck that might be in Dallas. 4-color Slogurk.
So Brennan Crawford took down the 168-player regional championship in Melbourne, Australia this past weekend with 4-color Slogurk. And let's just take a look at the composition of this build. Now, we've solidified here a 3-2 split on Throat Goat and Cut Down. I think that's great. That makes a lot of sense given how many 2-drops we're trying to use and how fast we're trying to use them. The one Malcolm in the main is kind of the spicy tech here. I have no idea if this is actually good enough to merit the slot, but the fact that it's here and it won a regional tells me it did some work, right? Vorinclex has solidified as the key choice over Bonnie Pal. Makes a lot of sense to me personally. I like the way this is positioned. Elish Norn, we're seeing it in the sideboard. Love that. Love seeing this card in the sideboard in particular because a deck like Slogurk has so many triggers that this is going to be a mirror breaker and a half. And this is also going to give you a lot of room to hedge against Temur, Convoke, and Domain. We haven't seen a lot of Domain lately, but it's still around.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. I was wondering about the Elish Norn, but yeah, Mirror Breaker, that makes a ton of sense. Why, though, do we have a third Titania in the sideboard? What's that about?
To me, Titania is indicative that we are worried about Mono Red, we are worried about Bant Toxic to a degree, and we are worried about Boros Convoke. We are trying to establish a plan where we are gaining a lot of life, and we are just pushing them back and giving ourselves time to develop the board. And that's really what Titania does a great job of. It also can be played, and then you can get a Glistening Deluge down. So that's nice that you can like start to recover and then Deluge, play a land, slam home the door, let's get going. You know what I mean? Like it's done such a great job on that front. So I think that's why it's in there.
Okay, all right. Well, let's talk about I guess new to tier 1 this week, Golgari Midrange.
Sinistar 619 snagged the trophy last Saturday in a 45-player MTGO challenge with Golgari Midrange, elevating this archetype into Tier 1 land at long last. So let's look at what they're doing here. First of all, there is now a 4-2 split on Cut Down and Duress. I have seen 4 Cut Down, no Duress. I've seen a 3-3 split. 4-2 to me says we are worried primarily about Boros Convoke and Esper Midrange, and then we are worried about Azorius Control. And given how things went for those 3 archetypes and how many top 8s and trophies they racked up, that seems correct for this past weekend. Now, similarly, we go up the curve a little bit. There's only 3 Broncos. That's interesting. But I think the point of this was to add that Karavik in, and that was where that last Bronco slot didn't quite make the cut, right? The 2-1 split on Bitter Triumph and Go for the Throat might be indicative of Simic Cookies starting to be more of a deck, where Go for the Throat is just a liability half the time. We also see in this 2 Hostile Investigators and 3 Lilies. That is a hard hedge for Control, Temur Analyst, Domain, anything that is trying to be bigger and badder than Golgari. We are putting a lot of hate right there.
Okay. I see. Yeah, I was wondering about the 3 Broncos myself. I can see where that 1 slot went to Karavik. Speaking of Karavik, Liliana triggers that ability that he has, but why 3 copies? Do we really need 3 copies?
So I like the way this, people will disagree. I like the way this is positioned. Here's the thing. Lily, if you're not playing against Boros Convoke, if you're not playing against Wedding Announcements, it's a great card. It's a great card. It's going to do a lot of work in any kind of mirror match. It's going to do a lot of work against many different mid-range iterations, and it puts in a lot of work against Control. This deck specifically is designed to feature that because, yeah, game 1 against Convoke, you're giving up massive points. But post-board, if you looked at that sideboard, there were 4 Path of Perils. So they wanted a very clean side in, side out. Like, Boros Convoke, got it. Game 1 sucks, whatever. Path of Perils, 4 of them coming in. Lily's your auto coming out. Super easy. So it's just going for hard hedges with your 3-drop slot instead of trying to find something that's decent against everything but great against nothing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, well, that does it for our Tier 1 archetypes. Let's go on down to Tier 2, where I'll start with Temur Ramp. All right, Temur Ramp. So Nathan Basser finished second in the 168-player regional in Australia this past Saturday on the back of Temur Ramp. Now, while the archetype didn't manage to slide into Tier 1 despite being nearly 10% of the metagame, there's plenty to discuss as we look forward to Dallas coming up this week. So, notables, 3rd Spelunking in the main. We're shifting over to this card. I think that's the proper choice. It does a variety of things for the deck. I think this card works as a 3 of. I want to point out the 3-1 split of World Soul to Doppelgang. I believe the 4th World Soul does need to go to something else. We talked about this last week about win conditions for the deck. Doppelgang is a great win condition. Not only are you're able to copy something from the opponent as well, and I've seen that a lot of times where that plays out in Teamer's favor. 2 Bonnie Pauls, 1 Titan in the top end. Notably, you got Reach. Thinking Esper, thinking a lot of these mid-range decks that depend on evasive creatures. 2 Vampire Vengeance in the main for Boros Convoke. And notably, 1 Hullbreaker in the sideboard.
Now, we've talked about it from time to time with Spelunking, and we see that Kellen in the sideboard, right? Do we actually want that 3rd Spelunking in the main more than we want that 2nd Kellen in the main, which would then open up a sideboard slot?
I see. I think Spelunking it's a better card overall. It does more, plain and simple. I know it costs 1 more, but you get to draw rather than investigate. You still get to play the extra land. But really the most important part is that lands come in untapped. And for this deck, that's very important in terms of mana efficiency and getting to the top end, getting to that lethal World Soul. So I think it just makes things just a bit quicker for the deck.
Yeah, and given how many times we're going to recur fetch lands, and they're going to fetch lands that are going to come into play tapped otherwise, I can see that argument. That makes a great deal of sense, even if it shatters my heart that I saw not 1 Thrun in that sideboard. We'll see how Dallas pans out. I think we'll see the return. But with that in mind, let's go to a deck that comes in and just kind of shakes things up from time to time. Mono Red Aggro.
Tatsuaki Yajima catapulted Red back into the spotlight by taking down a 258-player, Japan Cup with this archetype, reminding us all what happens when we focus too heavily on control and swarm strategies. But let's take a look at what they did differently. We're noticing a 3-3-2 split of Scorching Shot, Obliterating Bolt, Witchstalker Frenzy. Of course, this matters because what are we expecting to face off against? If we're seeing a lot of Obliterating Bolts, and maybe we're expecting a lot of Esper, such and such. Golgari Midrange coming back might be a reason why Scorching Shot, Witchstalker Frenzy have a rise in stock value. We'll see what happens in Dallas. 4 Forges in the main is a solid choice now. It's solidified in this deck, and I think that's no longer a controversial choice. Control is out and about. This is a great card against Control. 1 Godric. Over the 4th Lightning Strike, there's quite a bit of synergy with Godric here, with things coming in, 2 at a time, or two permanents coming in at a time. I want to point out the 2/2 and the Festivities, Elder Dragon War Wrath effects. They're generally, I think, for Convoke.
Fair. Now, I look at Convoke. It's fast, right? Is Elder Dragon War actually fast enough to warrant those sideboard slots, Max, or does it need to come in elsewhere?
I like this card, but I haven't used it in a long time. I think one of the reasons that it's gone out of fashion is turn 4 is just a bit slow for hurting Convoke's board. Generally, they get it set up before then. But looking at some of the other cards in this deck, if you think about it, right, you think this shoots mono red and it's in the foot, but most of the creatures either survive through prowess or have options such as adversary to get a 1/1 to survive the 2 damage, stay just out of reach. And so in those cases, maybe this is good, especially in light of the fact that there's these other modes to it as well, including discarding and drawing basically a new hand, which is very helpful with mono red. And then, of course, you get that 4/4 dragon body, which also helps as well. Interestingly enough, I was also looking at Feldon, which is 2 toughness, and actually procs by you hitting yourself. So that's interesting that even if you have to sacrifice your own Feldons, that you get something out of it. Like I said, hand fixing tends to help red. The 4/4 body also notably procs Godric, and is also pretty powerful to have on board against a lot of decks after a board wipe. So this card may come in against Toxic as well.
I like that there's a little bit more to it, especially the prowess trigger, like Swift Spear being able to play a little offense on the back of that and go from 1/2 to 2/3, 2 damage, wipe the board, clear the path. Here come the prowess creatures. Okay, I can see where it has some merit there. But we're going to switch gears and not worry about damaging and loss of life and all of that jazz, but poison.
Nobuaki Kanda made it to the semifinals of that 258-player Japan Cup with Bant Toxic this past weekend. Wow, 2 aggro decks up there, highlighting its return amid 6 top 8s this past weekend. So let's look at the differences again. From last week, we were talking about this Yami Vaya Coast over Botanical Sanctum. That trend is continuing. I suspect it's because you need that early untapped land. Like you have to have it with decks like Bant Toxic. You depend on your 1-drops. You have 16 core creatures. Nothing really high on the curve here. So you're really focused around those creatures. But the deck is also very focused around Skrelv's Hive. You have only 2 Fading Hopes in the main. You have a high reliance here on Skrelv's Hive, splitting the Fading Hopes with Aspirant's Ascent for the Jawbone Duelist, which has come back into the deck as a full set. And then 2 Charge of the Mites, which I suspect are there, of course, to do damage, but you really want that mode that speeds up the Skrelv's Hive clock.
So, Max, I look at this, and in the sideboard, I note that we have 4 knockout blows. Not a single tier 1 deck am I aware of where knockout blow is amazing. I'm not saying you can't play it against Boros Convoke. I'm just saying, like, there are other things you can do against Boros Convoke that are a little bit more damning. So, do we need those 4 knockout blows, and are they good enough to merit their slots?
Yeah, when I play Boros Convoke and I see single target removal, I'm like, yes.
Right.
I believe this is too many slots to devote to it. Maybe you leave, a couple, and then devote the other 2 to something that I think is actually more effective against Boros Convoke, which is Doorkeeper Thrall. A lot of Boros Convoke depends on those ETB effects, right? So I think those slots are better given up to that.
And we have a couple Doorkeeper Thralls in the sideboard, but I can see what you mean. Where if Boros Convoke's the top deck, play 4 Thralls and 2 knockout, not the other way around. It doesn't make sense to do it any other way. That said, let's talk about the rise of the Dimir Aggro. We haven't seen this in a minute, Max.
Whew, I'm excited to see this on here at all. I was wondering when it'd make a comeback, but Remph made it to the finals of a 45-player MTGO challenge this past Saturday with Dimir Aggro, maybe signaling the return to the fray for this deck. Let's look at what they did here. I noticed the 3 Vadmir New Bloods in the main, so we're hoping on a lot of interaction, and I see the interactions what this deck is known for. You get a 3-3 split of Cutdown and Duress in the main. We were talking about that with Golgari Midrange, so we are concerned with the light aggro, and we're also concerned with control in that order. We see the 3 Lily, 2 Hostile Investigators, which is starting to become a staple among decks that are black and something else like Golgari, but we're seeing it here in Dimir, which means we're hedging hard against the domain control matchup. Double Lord Skitter in the main for the graveyard hate. You got to have it. And then, of course, 2 Tidebinders in the main as well, doing work against those, the domain matchup especially. 2 Dreams of Steel and Oil are also in the sideboard, notably.
Now, I like that a deck that plays Make Disappear is playing Lord Skitter. To me, that just makes sense fundamentally that you're saying, okay, let's have little Dirtles to sack. And I also like it when so many other decks are just absolutely intent on running Lily. If you get Lord Skitter out for even a turn, their Lilies are basically turned off, right? So that's pretty nice in terms of hedging. That said, the Dreams of Steel and Oil, predominantly in Dimir in the past, that was used to mitigate what Domain was doing, to just rip Atraxas out of their hand, rip Archangels in particular out of their hand. Is it good enough if Domain's falling off a cliff?
That's meta dependent, right? Domain is falling off a cliff, but there are some other decks that are big creature based decks. I'm thinking about the Gruul Ramp, other decks out there that are just kind of like on the outside looking in, off meta. But really, I would advise at least turning one of those slots into a Duress, and maybe the other into something anti-control like a Cryptic Code or something. There's really too much control in the meta right now, and I think Dimir Aggro does best when it hedges its bets in that direction.
Fair. And that is going to take us through all of the tier 2 decks, all of the tier 1 decks. We now get to go to the best part of the show, in my opinion, the Brewer's Corner, and we're going to go ahead and kick things off with a little bit of Gruul Terror.
Ooh, boy.
Alrighty, gang. So credit to Mother of Halflings from the MTGR Discord. I know that this is not anyone in the Discord's original list, but we all worked on it together. It's a group project. Mother of Halflings was the leading source behind it. So I sat down with her the other night, and we kind of looked through and considered some different card slots and wound up on a very solidified, condensed set of 60 in the main. If you look at here, it's just like fours. Like, that's it. Just 4s across the board. I can tell you that this list has been doing really well for me. I just took down, Mono Red. Didn't think that was going to be a thing, and I managed to just outclock Mono Red with this on the basis that these creatures that look so clunky at the top end are really also just 2 mana and 3 mana spells. So it's a lot smoother than you'd think, despite seeing like all of these 6-drops at the top end. And then the sideboard has that beautiful plan of 4 up the Beanstalk, 4 Tyrannics, and a Thrun. So if you're like, how do we get through control? Well, there's a plan. There's a plan, and it's not easy for them to answer.
Oh yeah, I can attest. I took it for a spin just before this recording, and I put a screenshot in the Rebellion Discord, and I was just like, all I said was, "What a beautiful game this is!" Right? Control didn't even stand a chance in that matchup. It was fun. It was very fun.
Fair. And with that, we're gonna go ahead and get to our second one here, Jeskai Legends.
Oh yeah, I love these Legends decks everywhere. Coming out of the woodwork. It's really cool. Credit to CVD MTG of the Rebellion Discord. This is partially a Pia deck, right? There's a lot of interaction with Pia Nalar. You have NT, of course. You have Delny, which doubles your triggers for those cards. And then you have Geralf, a payoff really for the access to the multiple spells you get per turn with that exile, cards off the top effect. Aruth, also a card that I've never really seen before get any kind of play, also aids with this and triggering Pia, adding to that ability. Another notable card you never see, Kayla's Reconstruction. I used to use that in Azorius Soldiers all the time, but it works here. Really, unless you're facing like heavy control, they typically counter it. But game one against anything else, play this card. It's awesome. It'll help you set up your board fast. And then notably in the sideboard, Thalia, that I think that card is going to come back into fashion. Fits here just in case of that control matchup.
And I mean, I love that this list is grinding so hard, and you have the ability to combine Rona, Inti, and Pianalar, because that's a nice little combo, especially if you get Relic of Legends. Like, it feels like the individual pieces are okay, but once you combine 2 or 3 of them, this list really starts to take off. So I'm super intrigued to see how it goes, but we're going to hop on over and let's talk a little bit about the other Legends deck, Naya. So credit to Matt961-Rune20 of the MTGR Discord, came up with this list, has been tuning it up, has been working with it, literally got an update to it not 20 minutes before we started this, and I can tell you I like where we're going with it. What we're trying to do here, fundamentally, from what I understand, is abuse Yodian Dissident and Anim Pakal as much as we can. There's a lot of different ways we're doing this, but at the end of the day, we are trying to get to the place where we're having a bunch of artifacts into the battlefield, which is what Anim Pakal is going to do with these little gnome artifact creatures, and then bumping all our creatures up as fast as we can. So I like what we're trying to do here. It's fast. It's faster than you think it's going to be, and you have some staying power too. Like, on the back of Virtue of Loyalty, this really is going to give you that end game once you get into the late game to just push past everybody, especially when you can play offense and defense, which it gives you the ability to do. These collector cages are also sneaky good. You look at this card, you may not immediately see the impact. I promise you, you play with it, it grinds harder than you think.
Oh, wow. That artifact hideaway card. That's pretty neat. All right. Well, let's finish up our Brewer's Corner by talking about Athena the Bun's Selesnya Ramp. So I'm going to go ahead and state this now at the beginning. I really suspect, and this is not confirmed, that she came up upon this build after we were discussing how to revamp Domain from its slump, and I think just if you take the guts out of Domain, this is what you end up with. But we've got 3 March, 2 Get Lost to make up the single target removal suite in the deck. That's very critical. And then 2 Depopulates, 3 Sunfalls to make up the board wipe. So you're still dealing with heavy removal in this deck, much like Domain. Bringing back the Topiary plus Invasion of Zendikar combo, still great way to ramp up, great way to make Topiary relevant and attack in. Double Elish Norn, gotta love that. Shutting down Convoke, among other things, and also doubling your triggers. And then Vorinclex is in here also to help you ramp into the 7-drop slot, which is really what we want, with full sets of Tyrannix Rex, Vaultborn Tyrant. And let me tell you, the Tyrant's ability, it really gives this deck some longevity and an ability to grind. It can really get out of hand quick.
And for those of you who are like, well, why don't we just play Domain? Part of this is that I think this list actually has a better shot at beating Control because of those T-Rexes at the top end. But also, this list, if I'm not mistaken, is rotation-proof, Max. This list is still going to be 75 for 75 around once we hit the fall. So this is something to keep an eye on. It's something to keep an eye on anyway. But that's going to bring us to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we looked at 13 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 7 of Outlaw Standard?
I really don't think we're going to see an emerging archetype have any kind of breakout performance this late in the season. The metagame is known. The quantities of each archetype really continue to shift, but this past weekend's results only further solidified what to expect. We may have some outliers like Dimir or Bant get mixed results here and there, but for the most part, Tier 1 is settled territory.
Yeah, I'm with you there. The only aggro deck we see in Tier 1 right now is Boros Convoke, which should tell you how consistent it is compared to its counterparts. And I mean, I've played it in Pioneer and RC. I can attest to the staying power. It takes a board wipe followed by slamming the door shut on a sticky threat like Outlaws to actually keep them from recovering. They will outgrind most decks.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Esper Midrange and Golgari Midrange are really battling out to see which build offers a stronger base to operate from. Esper has more trophies, consistent results, right? But Golgari hasn't really had a set build all season. So whereas Esper hasn't deviated more than a handful of cards, that might be why, that had the staying power. That might be why that deck is more consistent.
And I mean, this in turn, it brings back Slogurk, which eats all those mid-range decks for breakfast and has that strong plan right up until the Graveyard Hate comes out in spades.
Yeah, and which explains the latest round of struggles for Temur Ramp. They share, much of the same hate as Slogurk without the aggro plan B to fall back on.
And last but not least, Azorius Control, it continues to warp how the rest of the metagame can approach their main board. We're seeing that uptick in Lily, in Hostile Investigator, even Duress, as everyone else skews to contain this beast of a deck. Now, there's a reason it has 13 trophies in this season already, and personally, if I'm heading to Dallas, I'm sleeving up Azorius Control.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Well, that's another week in the books, folks. We thank you for supporting us, and we want to give a special shout out to our members who support our content weekly. Be sure to comment below. Let us know what you're seeing on Ladder. We're off next week as all eyes are on Dallas and Dreamhack, but we'll be back after that with more analysis. Just 2 weeks away.
Until next time, Rebels. Untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.